Hello from California, this is Sandy from Messy Papercrafts, and today I have a tutorial for you where I use Dura-Lar by Graphics Arts and alcohol inks. So Dura-Lar, that's this plastic clear film, and I really love it together with alcohol inks because it almost looks like stained glass. And you can use it with any die cuts that you have, especially when they have this open space that you can attach the Dura-Lar film behind. So here it really looks like stained glass. Or you can use this as a background. So here it's with lifting ink. And in this one you see it, there is some lifting ink behind and then also a white die cut. And this way it's really versatile, and what I love about it is that you don't have to worry to seal your alcohol inks. You basically just use the alcohol inks on one side, then you turn it around and then you have this plastic on the front. And yeah, it just looks like stained glass. It's really pretty. So here you see the setup now that I will use to work with the alcohol inks and Dura-Lar. And this Dura-Lar is not the one by Tim Holtz because he came out with his own version a few weeks ago, but I couldn't find it in my local craft store. However, I did find this one. And Dura-Lar, so the difference between Yupo or any other alcohol ink paper is that it's clear, but it's also supposed to be heat resistant. But you will see later that I struggle a bit with that because I wanted to use a stamp and I believe there was just too much detail in the stamp. And with that I had issues to emboss the paper. So it says it's heat resistant, and you see later that I did get a stamp to work with it. However, it was a little bit of a learning curve, and I'm not sure, maybe Tim Holtz version is different because I saw a tutorial or a demonstration with him a couple of weeks ago and he embossed his own version of Dura-Lar with no problems at all. So I'm thinking either he's way more practiced than I am, or maybe his version of Dura-Lar might be also different. And now I'm showing you the other items that I'll be using. So here we have 91% isopropyl alcohol and the Tim Holtz alcohol blending solution. And then of course lots and lots of alcohol ink. And because you work on a transparent film, I felt that the darker colors were better, especially for a beginner, because it's a little bit more visible on what you're actually creating. However, if you want to create the lighter results, then obviously you can do this too. And I will blow them around with this Tim Holtz blowing tool, and then I also have some of his brushes. And the brushes come together with a mini mister in this set, and I will fill this mini mister with alcohol later just to get a different effect, but make sure that you never ever fill this with the Tim Holtz blending solution, because the alcohol blending solution is actually a resin and you don't want to spray this around because this will harm your eyes or your lung. And in the same way I'll also use the respirator, because I kind of find that on Dura-Lar you have to use a little bit more alcohol and alcohol inks, and you don't want to breathe this in. That's why I'm using the respirator this time. And I also have a wide open window and a purifier on high volume. And I'm protecting my skin with these gloves. And here I'm just thinking about that I will emboss this later with this stamp. However, as you can see later, I struggle with that. I think the stamp is too big. However, it's really beautiful when I'm using it with alcohol lifting ink. So it's a beautiful stamp, as you will see later. And here I just show you my misty stamping form and also the tool that I'm using to just get a better impression on the stamping platform. So now I just put some baking paper underneath the Dura-Lar just so that it's easier for you to see it. And as I said, I'm using my gloves and I've got my respirator on. So yeah, make sure that you work in a really well ventilated area so that you don't breathe it in. So when I watched the Tim Holtz tutorial, he was doing this technique where he put some alcohol ink onto the crafting mat and then he was just swiping his Dura-Lar through it. And I thought this was a really cool effect. However, it needs a few layers because as you can see here, the Dura-Lar is transparent. So yeah, you probably have to practice with that a little bit, because it's definitely different to Yupo, because obviously on Yupo it's white and you immediately see what you're doing. And here I really had to practice. So the swiping through was kind of good to get a first base of color, but then I kind of felt it wasn't strong enough. And then I added some of the alcohol immediately onto the Dura-Lar, and then I didn't like that effect, so then I went back to the swiping through. So I have to admit that while I was doing all of that, I never liked the result. I actually thought it was a failure, and I was very close to giving up on this whole process, because this transparency, it kind of threw me off, probably just because I'm used to the Dura Bright by Graphics, because again, that's very similar to Yupo. It's a white paper, you see what you're doing. And with this one, I wasn't exactly sure what the result was supposed to be. So I just put it to the side, and now I'm just working on the next one, and I try to copy the colors now that Tim Holtz used in his demonstration, and they were darker. So usually I kind of like to work with pool and all these light blues, but now I thought maybe if I take Monsoon and Espresso and Moss and then some darker colors, maybe the result is just more visible and a little bit easier to work on. And I'm actually not using the gold by Tim Holtz. I prefer to work with the Jacquard Pinata brush, because I feel it's stronger in its gold. So I kind of feel you get more like a leafing effect, and it's a bit bolder than the mixatives or the alloys. And for some reason, when I tried to use my alloy, it also didn't shake well. Somehow the ball must have been somehow stuck inside the bottle and I couldn't shake it, so hence why I use here the pinata whenever you see gold, it's actually brass. And now I'm on my last trial of this swiping through the ink technique, where I'm still not sure if I like it or not. However, later when it's dry, I actually find out that I did like it, and I think it's similar to watercolor, because when I use watercolor I also think that doesn't look right until it's dry, because then it's not as dark anymore and not as splotchy. So I kind of feel with Dura-Lar it's a similar thing. So if you also try it and you're like, I think this doesn't look right, maybe just wait a few minutes until it's completely dry and then turn it over. And especially with this one here, later it almost looks like a photograph of a cave. It's really bizarre. I think because the Dura-Lar is so shiny that once you turn it over to the side that doesn't have the alcohol ink on it, it's actually beautiful, because it's like stained glass and the colors or how you put them on almost doesn't matter. But at that moment in time, I don't have that wisdom yet that I will like the results later. So now I gave up on the swiping through, and it's now the alcohol ink straight on the Dura-Lar, because I thought the transparency of the Dura-Lar, it just needs more color than just the swiping. And I also find that I'm always using blending solution and alcohol at the same time, because I feel on the Dura-Lar you need this movement of both, but not a lot, because the problem is when you add too much alcohol or too much blending solution, the colors become even more transparent and you lose this vibrancy. So at this stage I can recommend that I feel that both is really helpful, because usually I don't use blending solution unless I work with the alcohol ink pearls, because they only move with blending solution, and because they have this mica or whatever pearly thing it's inside, you have to use blending solution, because otherwise they also will rub off later on. So yeah, I'm not really used to use the alcohol blending solution on alcohol inks, but here on the Dura-Lar it definitely helped to make them move around. However, don't use too much, and maybe just start with a little bit and then add more as needed. So here I was actually quite happy with the result, because now I had a lot more alcohol ink on it, and now I'm going to the second one and try the same thing again. However, the darker the colors and the more ink you are using, you get these dark spots, which I also didn't quite like. So I kind of tried to add now more gold or more blending solution or just pure alcohol just to get rid of these dark lines. And yeah, I think you have to work with more patience than I do, because I just wanted to put something on and just see the result and off I go. However, if you take your time and you just move them around, then yeah, you're probably better off. It's just a paper that needs a little bit more patience. And here you see the same problem again. So even though I put on already a lot of alcohol ink and the blending solution and the pure alcohol, they still didn't really move. And in the middle I had all this white. So now I'm just adding more and more color. And I feel that this works. However, using a big sheet of paper, so here it's the whole A4, comes with its complication, because now you have to work really fast, because in California, I have the problem that, all my mediums, they dry super fast. So I cannot even move this fast enough around. So I just have to add more and more ink and more blending solution and alcohol and immediately move it with the air blower. And when you work on a big sheet, then it's just a little bit complicated. But if you live somewhere where there is just more moisture in the air, then this might not be your issue. And maybe you have a bit more opening time with the alcohol ink. So yeah, this big paper was definitely not really wise. However, I also didn't want to give up on it. So now I thought it would be fun to fill this mini mister with the isopropyl alcohol and just spray it onto the paper just to get these little speckles. And yeah, very similar to how you can add water to your watercolor to get these white spotches, you can also do the same thing on alcohol ink with pure alcohol. So here I'm just dipping now this tool into the pure alcohol just to get more dots. And lastly, I thought I'd give it a go with the hair dryer. So these are those hair dryers that usually have a brush attached, and I just took it off, and now you can just have fun with blowing the inks around with more air. However, it also becomes less controllable than with the Tim Holtz blower. So it really depends on you, but I thought now it just gets a little bit wild and messy. However, that's my name, and that was still a lot of fun. So give it a go if you like that better or the blower. And here are the results as promised. So this is the backside with the ink, and now I turn it around and it's the plastic on top. And it's really great because now you don't have to seal it. And it looks like stained glass. I think it's so pretty. Almost like a photograph. This one here looks like a cave somehow. I think it's absolutely stunning. I just love this result. And in the end, I didn't really have to worry too much about the color or the intensity. I think all of the results are really pretty. However, how about if there is a result that you didn't like? So here I apply alcohol lift ink and I spread it with a brayer. And now I apply a copy paper, or a little bit thicker, maybe 65 pounds paper on top of it. And the beauty is now that you can decide which result you like better. So either you could now play with the Dura-Lar, because now this ink is lifted and it's not as dark anymore. So this might be fun. Or you can apply more lift ink and once again spread it around with the brayer and put this paper onto it again. And here you just see I use even more lifting ink onto the paper as well. So now I really lift a lot of alcohol ink from the Dura-Lar. And then you can decide if you like the Dura-Lar better with a lot less ink on it, or if you want to work with the paper. Because I think the Dura-Lar, still not that great. It's a little bit splotchy now, but maybe some areas are usable. But I think the paper is really cool. And because it's paper, you can use this now for so many things. You can do your regular stamping on it, you can use it as a background, you can do die cuts from it, so many possibilities. So let's talk about the embossing now. And as you can see, I cut out a piece of this Dura-Lar paper, and now I'm planning on using this beautiful dragonfly image that's stamped by Ciao, and I'm using here archival ink to ink it up. And then I even used more ink, and this time it was by VersaFine Clair, because that's really good for this detail. And now I'm even using a third ink, and I just know that you can emboss with that. So I'm applying a lot of ink to make sure that it's moist so that the embossing powder can stick to it, and where I also know that the detail will be visible once it's stamped down. So here you can see I just used this black embossing powder by Ranger, and here I'm using now this heat gun to emboss this image. But the problem is, I think that, as I said, the image is too big, so I have to put a lot of heat on for a long time to actually get it embossed. And also this black powder kind of stuck on everything on the Dura-Lar because it's quite static. So the image ended up too dark, and it was also warped. So instead of doing the embossing that I had planned, I really loved the stamp, so I wanted to use it. So I thought, how about alcohol lift ink? So you just saw me using the bottle, and this is now the pad, and I'm just spreading it across the stamp and then pressing it down. And I'm cleaning the stamp on regular paper just to get the alcohol lift ink off. And now you will see in real time how to work with alcohol lift ink. Because alcohol lift ink is one of those things where, once again, you need a little bit patience, and you have to do the work yourself. So it's not like a stamp, you just stamp it, you see it, and that's it. So here the stamp is almost not visible, so you might be like, did she even stamp? I can't see it. And that's why it's called lift ink, because you have to lift this ink off yourself. And when you look at this, that's just a kitten roll, just this cloth, you will see that the ink is now lifted from the Dura-Lar and it's on my cloth. And I'm sorry that it looks like an earthquake, because obviously every time I dab onto the image, my camera wobbles because that's attached to the table and everything wobbles now. But yeah, you just need a little bit patience, because this whole lifting might take like 2 to 3 minutes or something. So you will see that there is one point that when you look at the cloth, that there isn't a lot of ink on it anymore. And that's when you know that you lifted all this ink off, and then you can just swipe over the image and just get rid of the rest of the lift ink, because at that time you don't risk that you smush the image. And here I just now clean the rest of the lift ink and just polish over it and turn it over, and ta-da! Now you have this beautifully lifted image. And now I just assemble this image to a card base. I thought here this craft cardstock works really nicely with this, yeah, kind of more botanical greenish image. So it looks a little bit like nature and the dragonfly. And I really love the stamp, so I kind of feel it's a beautiful background and foreground all in one. And all that's left to do is just to finish the card with a sentiment. Here I use one that has this craft look, so it fits to the craft card base. And then I have some rhinestones. And here we have our first finished card. So now I want to do the same thing again. I want to have one image on the Dura-Lar where it's lifted. So I'm just inking up the stamp once again with the alcohol lifting ink pad. But I also want to use now the ink that's on the stamp, because that can look really cool as well, because it has a lot of color now on it from the alcohol ink. So now I just have to use some real alcohol ink cardstock, and it's one of those glossy ones, and it has to be porous, so it cannot be Yupo. So I just put this cardstock down, and now I have the ink from the stamp, that's all alcohol, on the alcohol ink cardstock. And look how cool that is. Now you have all this different ink on it. And to finish this off, I just assemble some gold cardstock onto my mint card base, because I just thought that kind of looks nice if it has this golden frame. And to make it a little bit more interesting, I also thought to use this splatter brush and just splatter a little bit of alcohol. So I mixed this alcohol ink with a little bit of isopropyl. So once again, I'm not splattering here any alcohol blending solution, just the ink and the pure alcohol. And now I have my piñata brush once again, and I just add some golden splatters just to give it more of a mixed media vibe. And I finish the card off with one of those sentiment strips that you can find by Tim Holtz. It's one of those metallic sticker books, and it's a bit difficult to see here, but it's a black strip and then there is a golden sentiment on it. So I thought that fits all nicely together with the golden splatter and the golden frame. However, now I had a pure black sentiment and there wasn't anything black on the card. So I did some stamping in black archival ink, because that ink will not smush or smear or anything on this cardstock. So that works well together with alcohol ink. And this way I just added more contrast. And this is the finished card, and I think it's really cool. I really enjoyed stamping with alcohol ink, because this way you don't just get one color but lots of different ones, and it's also like a really sharp and crisp result. So definitely, if you never tried alcohol lift ink before, then give it a go, even if it's just to stamp an image. It's really fun to play around with lift ink on Dura-Lar, because there's really no right or wrong. So the darker the alcohol ink, the more visible will be the impression, and it looks a bit like an X-ray. And then obviously you have more contrast, because you have this dark alcohol ink, and then I already applied white paper under the Dura-Lar, and hence this is why the dragonfly looks almost white. And then you have the dark alcohol ink and you have this great contrast, so you get a really crisp result. And you really don't have to do a lot here to just finish the card. Just I added here once again this gold frame, and then I had some sentiment. And now is obviously the question, what happens when you are not really happy with the result of the lift ink? What is when this whole dragonfly or whatever stamp you're using isn't really visible? So I think that you can still use it just as a normal background, and then you just use one of your die cuts as a focal point. So here I just used this kind of old die set by Tim Holtz that had these different flowers and stems. And then I just touched that as a foreground, and ta-da, you have another great card. So there's really no right or wrong. You can use the lift ink as a focal point or as a background, and then just play around with different die cuts. And sometimes it also works that you can use the negative and the positive of the same stamp. So here I didn't really like the lift ink, because I left it on for too long and the borders, they became a little bit blurry, so it didn't really work by itself. However, I kind of thought, how about if I stamp down the image, and you could also emboss it to have it even darker and more shiny, and then layer the lift ink on top of this embossed or stamped image. And this way you don't have to color the original image. You can still use the color from your alcohol ink and the lift ink, because now the lift ink kind of acts like a highlight, and then the embossed or stamped image underneath, that's basically like your shadow or your crisp image. And now I just emboss some of these sentiments from Tim Holtz, because I really love that these sentiments have more of an airy looking calligraphy. So I feel that a lot of sentiments, they have this really tight typography, so the typewriter makes it almost difficult to emboss, and here all the letters are a little bit spaced out, and hence embossing is really easy. Nothing really smashes together, and the sentiments are also very motivational and inspiring, so it's a great set to emboss sentiments for your cards. And then I finished the card off with some glitter by Stickles, so that the wings are a little bit more shiny. And then once again the card is already finished, because with such a great foreground there's really not a lot to do. once again, this is the advantage of Dura-Lar, because it's plastic and see-through. You can try using all sorts of things behind it, like here this black writing, for example. So if I couldn't convince you to try out stamping with alcohol lift ink, then here I just have another quick tip for you if you are interested in stamping with big stamps or maybe very detailed stamps, and if you can't get a clear impression. So in my hand right now I'm holding the specialty stamping paper by Tim Holtz, and it feels really smooth. So as you can see, I just stroke it here, because it has this coating on it, and I believe that's probably why the result later is very crisp and shiny. And in comparison, right here I have the Tim Holtz watercolor paper that has the watercolor texture on one side and then the smooth texture on the other side. So it's kind of similar in its look, so it's a bit difficult to see on the camera. So the first one that I'm stamping now is with the regular watercolor paper, and I'm stamping on the smooth side. And a lot of times I read comments from crafters on other brands' Facebook page, for example, where they say, hey, I have the stamp and I don't get a good impression. It's all blotchy and I think the stamp is broken. However, if you ever run into this issue, then of course, first of all, I would recommend that you're using a stamping form. That's what I'm doing here. I'm inking up the stamp and then I ink it up again and just stamp it down on the exact same spot as I did before, just to get more and more ink on. So obviously I want to see all this detail. But if that still doesn't do the trick, if you still say, oh man, this looks so spotty, I don't like it, then I would recommend that you stop, that you fight the urge to clean your stamp, because a lot of times this polymer that actually acts like a resist, so it doesn't really want to be inked up, but the more you put ink on, especially if you prime it with like a black archival ink or something like that, then the more ink is on the stamp, the better it will print later on. And I don't obviously mean fresh ink, so the idea is that you put ink on your stamp and you let it dry, and then you ink it up again and you let it dry. And this way, the dirtier and grittier the stamps become, the easier it will be to have a satisfying image. So that's just a little trick that I learned from Tim Holtz a long time ago, and I think that works really well. However, if that still doesn't work, then look at this specialty stamping paper on the right. So here you have so much detail and the same ink looks completely black and it's really beautiful. And then on the left you have the normal regular watercolor, which is still beautiful. I just wanted to point out that if you have any issues ever with your stamps, then try these tricks as mentioned, or give the specialty stamping paper a try to see if that works. And here I just finished off the stamping image with nothing else except some glitter, because I thought it looked great in just black and white. However, if black and white is not your thing, then here is another version where I just played with color. So yeah, just to show that with one stamp you can have such endless possibilities. So I couldn't let go of the idea that this Dura-Lar is supposed to be heat resistant, and I wanted to find out what did I do wrong. I already figured that the stamp before was too big, was too much detail, which meant I had to heat it a lot, so obviously that didn't work. But I also thought maybe I didn't like the black effect, because everything now turned black, and I thought I will try it in different colors. So here I try this now in white. However, I can already say, spoiler alert, I didn't like this effect either. I actually found that with these even smaller stamps, if the stamp is still too dense, the only thing that was halfway likable was actually clear embossing powder. So when you look at the stamp here, you will see that even though it's now smaller and doesn't have as much detail, these leaves, they're still close together, and I kind of feel that any like white embossing powder or black, it kind of just smashed all over the place, and I didn't get a good embossed image. I just thought it was too dense. So later on you will see that I use a wider stamp that's a bit more airy, so to speak. It has less lines that are close together, and then the embossing worked a little bit better. However, here I just wanted to test all those different stamps from the stamp set just because I thought they're so beautiful. And stamped, I think, yeah, they're fantastic, but I don't really think that they work on the Dura-Lar. So the next thing you will see here is that I also forgot to use an anti-static powder, which meant that I would still have the white powder everywhere. But I thought, if this heating gun that I used before doesn't work, how about the one that Tim Holtz uses all the time, this crafting heating tool, because it's just not as hot as the other one. And that worked a little bit better. However, embossing with this one, that really takes a long time. So usually I have an embossing gun that's not even an embossing gun, that's from Home Depot or Lowe's or something. That's actually like a real tool to get tiles off your kitchen or something like that. So this is really hot, and hence it's a little bit dangerous, so you have to be really careful when using that. However, embossing with it, it's a dream, because anything embosses within a minute or so. And with this crafting heating tool, that takes a really long time. But you still have to be also conscious about that you move it around a lot. So even with this little tool that doesn't have a lot of heat and air, I still find that when you have it on Dura-Lar too long on one specific spot, that will still warp. So it's really, yeah, a learning curve to move the heating tool around a lot so that there is no warping, and yeah, that you still get an embossed image. And here is the result, and if we zoom in closer, you can see it still doesn't lay fully flat, so it's still a bit warped. But I don't give up, so here comes the stamps that I said before. So I use this peacock now from Chou and Flowers, and this image is, yeah, I don't know how to say it, looser. So the lines, they're not so tightly together. And this time I also used my anti-static powder, but I only used it on the one side, and to be honest, I should have used it on both sides, because yeah, Dura-Lar is fairly static, and if you have any little crumbs of the embossing flakes that go underneath the paper, then most likely you will emboss those also. So yeah, the ones on top you might actually see, so you can use a little brush and just wipe them off. But when the backside is also really static, then it doesn't help if you only use the anti-static on the front. So yeah, as I said, it's a learning curve. So learn from my mistakes and use the static powder on both sides, and then hopefully you have a little less issues. And if there is still some static, you can just wipe all of those little bits off with a brush. So in this trial and error, but yeah, this time it will actually work. But I wanted to use golden embossing powder, so here I'm now inking up with a lighter color, so not black, because I didn't want to have any black coming through. I just wanted to see the golden color, so I'm using here, I think, Hickory Smoke by Archival ink, because once again I know that this is an ink that will emboss if you use it really quickly with the embossing powder. So don't wait too long to put the embossing powder on, because then the archival ink will dry. However, if you work fairly quickly, then the archival ink is actually really nice to work with, because it also stays in place. Because I tried to emboss here before on the Dura-Lar with VersaFine Clear, but I kind of felt that didn't work really well, because somehow the image didn't come out really clear. So I would recommend the archival ink for the embossing on Dura-Lar. And once again, the heat gun, because here this crafting heating tool, that really makes a difference, because you can just wave it slowly around, and yeah, as I said before, don't hold it on just one spot, really move it around, and then with such an image it's actually doable. So at the end you will see, haha, here's the success. I was actually able to prove that Dura-Lar is indeed heat resistant, but make sure that the image isn't too big, or here the image is actually still fairly big, but the lines, they are just very loose and not really tied together. So it's kind of more of a, yeah, I don't want to say simplistic in a bad way. So I love this stamp by Chou and Flowers. I think it's gorgeous. However, it just doesn't have a lot of detail, and the less detail, the better in this case. And you notice here that I don't actually try to emboss on the alcohol ink Dura-Lar because I just didn't really want to ruin any other Dura-Lar that I had because I loved all of those colors and I didn't want to risk it. So I thought instead of inking or embossing straight to the alcohol ink Dura-Lar, I emboss on a single sheet of Dura-Lar and then I lay it over the alcohol ink, and this way I can also judge if I like the effect, because maybe I had in mind, hey, this would look really good in gold, and then I try it and I'm like, nee, this needs something totally different. So this way you don't really ruin your alcohol ink Dura-Lar, but you can still play with the transparent Dura-Lar, layer it up on top and then see if you like it or not. And here I thought that the golden embossing worked really well with the Dura-Lar alcohol ink that we've done before, where we had a lot of blue and green, because that actually looks a bit like the colors of a peacock. And yeah, this way you can just layer it on top and try it and see if it works or not. And in this case, I really loved it. And yeah, another beautiful card idea. So by now you might have wondered, if you are using Dura-Lar, and that's clear, how do you attach it to paper? Because obviously you don't want to see the glue. So my preference is this one. This is called Sticky Specks, and this is a micro adhesive, and I think it's almost invisible. So it's really cool if you have some intricate details that you want to glue and you don't really know without smushing too much glue around. So these little sheets, they're awesome for that, and they're also great for anything that's clear. Because I tried to attach it before with just a clear tape runner, because I thought, well, tape runner is clear, so why shouldn't that work? But it was indeed visible. You could see the line from the tape runner and it didn't look really pretty. And you will see this later, how I have to adjust something that I created. But these sticky specks, they are really awesome, because you can see here that I just peeled this backing sheet off, and the whole sheet here, the whole yellow sheet, is an adhesive. So I just pressed my Dura-Lar against it and then peeled it off, and now I can just attach the whole sheet onto the white paper, and now I just go over it with a cloth just to smoothen it out, and if there was any glue still on it, so that I don't have it on my fingers. And yeah, super easy. You can see the Dura-Lar is now stuck to the white paper, and then I just cut it into size, and then I can adhere it with normal tape runner now onto my card base, because obviously now I just have a white base, there is a paper underneath the Dura-Lar, so I can use whatever glue I want to attach it onto the card base. And now we can just play around with different die cuts to embellish this Dura-Lar background. So here I use this one by Sizzix that I really love, because it has these beautiful little stamps, kind of similar to the Tim Holtz that you saw before. And yeah, I just double down here now with the die cut just to make it a little bit thicker. So I cut this die twice and now just stick it on top. And I stuck these two die cuts together with my art glitter glue, which I use for a lot of different things. However, as you see here, I can also use these micro adhesive sheets, these sticky specks, once again, because if you have any intricate little dies, then you don't have to mess around with a bottle of glue. So it's easier with the sticky specks, in my opinion. And now I just finished the cuts off with some rhinestones, some pearls by Studio Light, and a sentiment. And in case you have any issues finding sentiments, if you don't have sticker books and so on, then oftentimes you can also look into your paper pads. So here we have this beautiful indigo paper by Ciao, which is from the same series where the stamp came from. And there are also a lot of great sentiments in there. So here I just cut off some of these strips because I liked the sentiments in there. And then I mixed it all together because I had one sentiment from a sticker book by Art by Marlene from Studio Light that I liked. But as I said, I also liked the sentiments inside this beautiful Ciao indigo paper. And yeah, this way you can obviously also mix and match your sentiments, whatever fits to your die cut or your background. And yeah, that's a lot of fun to assemble it all together. And once again, I just finish off here the whole card with some rhinestones just to give it a little bit more shine. So here I have another example of beautiful die cuts. So these are ones of my favorites, these stamps by Uniquely Creative, and that's what they look like here on the website. And yeah, they just have a really nice size. They're not too small, not too big. So the cards that I create here, there are 4¼ inch. So these are just perfect as a focal point. And once again, I just layer them together. Here I'm using my normal glue, my art glitter glue, to attach 2 layers together. And yeah, here I'm just assembling now the base, but then to actually have this stem on the base, I think the Sticky Specks once again did the trick, because then you don't squeeze out too much glue, so you don't ruin your Dura-Lar. And now I just finish this stem off, or this die cut off, with some glitter and with one of these Tim Holtz embossed sentiments that you've seen before. And look how beautiful that is, and it's so easily done. Another fun way to use your Dura-Lar alcohol ink background is for creating shaker cards. So here you just saw me gluing 2 frames together, just again to make the die cut a little bit more sturdy. And now I have these thin strips of double-sided foam tape, just once again to give it a little bit of height and a little bit of dimension. And now I just attach an acetate sheet behind it, and I just assemble now the Dura-Lar ink on my white card base. And yeah, this way you can just create a really quick and easy shaker card. I mean, the acetate sheet, I guess you could have also used the Dura-Lar for that. I just had an acetate sheet lying around. So yeah, I just used this as my window here. And as a background, I just attached some sentiments just to add some interest inside this window. And then once again, I use these thin double-sided foam strip once again to add some height, because now I just add these little bits of interest inside the background before I put in all the sequins. And this way, when you shake the card, there are still some sequins visible, even though all the other sequins are probably on the ground if you send it to somebody. But if you attach already some with glue, then there is some interest there all the time. And now I just have this golden sequin. I thought that fits nicely with the color of the background. And yeah, this way you can just create a quick and easy shaker card with your beautiful Dura-Lar background. If you don't like the idea of a shaker card, if that's too much trouble, maybe you have one of those dies where you already have a lot of windows inside the card. So here I think that's a die that was created by Mama Elephant. So it's one of those die sheets that has a lot of the same pattern. So here you have these hearts. And yeah, this is beautiful as well, because you can just layer the Dura-Lar behind, and it's another super easy card that you can create within minutes. And if you have any leftover that you can't use for a background, then you can create some really cool dies. So especially if you have any dies that have this open space, like here you see this window or here's a sleeve, then you can attach the Dura-Lar behind. And once again, it's super easy here with these Sticky Specks, because I just cut out the sleeve with some golden metallic paper by Tim Holtz. And now I obviously think, wow, this is quite intricate. So once again, the Sticky Specks to the rescue. And then I just attach this on the Dura-Lar and just cut around. And yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of fussy cutting, but here you see even I can do this. So it's a really easy shape. And this way you can create these beautiful leaves. And yeah, any die would really work. You just have to have this open space inside that you can attach the Dura-Lar behind. So this one here works well. This is a great die by Adhering. You will see that in a minute, how that looks inside the package. And obviously here that's perfect, because I say the whole time that it looks like stained glass. And here I actually have a window die, so that's perfect. And yeah, the possibilities here, they're really endless. Anything would really work here. And that's maybe also a great way how you can create the Dura-Lar in the first place. Because if you have already a die in mind, then of course you can play with colors that would work really well with those dies. So with these leaves, I was just lucky that I had some areas of Dura-Lar that were a little bit more green. So that fit really well together. And here I just assemble this now with another Tim Holtz embossed sentiment. And then I had as a background this white sheet, and this is actually, I'm not sure if it's so visible, but the background was imprinted with another die that had also leaves on it. And I just think then you have a lot of interest. So you have this beautiful Dura-Lar leaf as your focal point, and then also a beautiful embossed background. So it's not really embossed, it's actually a die that I used. It's one of those debossing dies. And yeah, I just finished the whole thing off once again with the same color frame. So this is another paper here by Tim Holtz in this green metallic. And then I just had some sentiment and some of these rhinestones. And yeah, super easy once again to create gorgeous cards. So here is one last example of how to use any leftover. So here just cut a die cut shape immediately into the card base, and you see now that I struggle here. I have to reposition this Dura-Lar a lot because I thought I would get away with using a tape roller. And when you look now through this opening of this flower, you actually see the line of the tape roller. So that really wasn't ideal. So I would recommend to use the Sticky Specks or something similar, because there are other companies who create something just as the Sticky Specks. Or you can obviously also sew maybe the Dura-Lar onto your card, and maybe this would be also a really interesting effect if you have a sewing machine. And you saw examples of how that would look amazing with mixed media in my last tutorial. And now I finally got the position right, and could somehow hide the tape. But as I said, you should really test this before, because otherwise you might ruin now the whole design. And the other great thing with the Dura-Lar, I thought, was that it's great for die cutting as well. So as you can see here, I cut now from the Dura-Lar a whole die cut thing where it says wonderful, this is Dura-Lar. And the thing that I wouldn't recommend is so that you cut it without that you already attached a white base, because I cut the Dura-Lar and then realized that the alcohol ink left marks on my plates. So just be careful with that, because when I try to die cut then the next time, the stains from the alcohol ink would transfer to the paper. So Dura-Lar is super easy to cut, so that's great, but still make sure that you attach it to a paper base before, so that you don't have any marks left on your plates in the machine. And here are now all the finished results. So here you see all the different examples of this beautiful stamp by Ciao with the dragonfly. The first one here that we did with lift ink and then stamped. And here we have the X-ray. So if you wonder why this is the opposite, that's just because here I turn the Dura-Lar around. So if you would have the Dura-Lar with the alcohol ink side up, then you would see the image in the same way. However, here I flipped the image over, and hence the stamp looks mirrored. And that's, I think, once again a really cool way how you can use the stamp in so many different ways with Dura-Lar. And here we have just the colorful result where I just stamped the image, and then I just went wild and I just fancy to color some. And then in contrast, here we have one that's just black and white with the stickles on the wings, just to add some glitter, so it doesn't look so sad, because otherwise it might also look like a sympathy card. But this way, it could work either way, colorful or a little bit more monochrome. Then here we have now the layered look with the embossed layer, so I think that's a really fun effect as well. I really love this peacock by Chou and Flowers. And as you've seen, the proof that the embossing indeed was successful. On this card I didn't flip the Dura-Lar around, so here we have the alcohol ink on top and the stamped image underneath. Here again it's flipped, so the Dura-Lar non-inky side is on top and the lift ink is underneath, so the X-ray image once again. And here we have another lift ink where the clear side is on top and the alcohol ink is on the bottom, and then we attached this cool die cut to add some focal point. So yeah, all these different ways of using the same stamp, so I think this is pretty cool. And here you see now all the die cuts where we attached the alcohol ink Dura-Lar straight behind. Here we have this open space that I just embellished with another sentiment. You could probably also do another stamp or something on top here, or another cutout or die cut to make it more interesting with the opening. And that's inside the card, so you can also write now here on the left side where we have this Dura-Lar. And here we have our beautiful leaves. And yeah, just to show you the difference with the sentiment. So every time we have this debossed background in white, and yeah, just to change it up with sentiments, either by Tim Holtz or here by Studio Light, or here's another sticker from the metallic sticker book by Tim Holtz. That really depends on you, and if you like more contrast, or if you prefer it a bit more nature-like, or if you like black as your sentiment color. And here we have this window, and yeah, the shaker card, if you're into it or not. I just sometimes love doing it. It's a lot of fun to shake. And I love that the golden sequins, they work really nicely together with the background. So that's a lot of fun. Or of course, if you're not into the shaky shake, then maybe if you have a die that has a window already in it. So here we have hearts. Maybe you have another die plate that has different shapes. Then that's definitely a really nice way to use your Dura-Lar. Makes it so interesting, but without any effort. And here I just created this little mason jar with once again a leftover that I had of the Dura-Lar. And here we have these Dura-Lar backgrounds that we just embellished with a white die cut. Well, technically two that we stuck together. So I hope that this was fun to see and that you enjoyed this video. Then please leave me a thumb up. And I see you next time. Have a crafty weekend.